Hello, everyone. I'm Annette Bartel from Latvian Public Television. I'm a journalist, but today here at Riga Security Forum, I'm going to host this discussion about supply chain security. And I would say that from the huge amount of things we could and we should learn from Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the importance of supply chains on the outcome of the war ranks really, really high. And so what have we learned? And are we all on the same page? Ministry, military, or all the experts, and what's probably the most important, the industry, about how we answer those challenges possessed especially by our region. That's what we are going to talk about for the next hour and a half. And now I am going to introduce you to our panelists. I'll start with the Ministry of Defense. We have State Secretary here, Aivars Puriņš, welcome. And then we have also a few members of the industry. We have Matt Warstedt, Senior Vice President of Nordics PATRIA Group. I'm glad to have you here. We have our local industry guy, Kaspars Polaks, Director of LMT Defense Technology Service. Welcome. And of course, every discussion needs an experienced expert of the field. So I'm glad to welcome here Mr. Jan Skažlec, Senior Research Fellow at Center of Geopolitical Studies. Nice to have you here. Nice to have all of you here. Thank you, everyone watching here on the spot and also online. We will have time for your questions. I promise you that, but I kindly ask you to wait with those till the end of this discussion. And in order to have time for these questions, I think we should not waste any more time and cut to the chase. So at the beginning, I really have just a question for all of you. We've known for a pretty long time already that regarding our eastern neighbors, we haven't actually won a lottery. But in order to make the most of a bad situation, we have to understand very clearly what are the key challenges we have to overcome regarding security of supply. And Mr. Skažlec, I would like to start with you. What would you name as the top challenges? And would you say they are the same in Nordic and both Baltic regions?
I think there are some differences. And of course, you're quite right. No matter how much Latvians may love skiing and mountains, we can't change places with Switzerland. Therefore, we are always going to have Russia as our partner on the east. And our aim in the long term must be to have a Russia with which we can live peacefully and with mutual respect. So what are the threats at the moment? Well, frequently we hear people talking about the Baltic states will be next. Whether this is true or not, that is part of Russia's most powerful weapon, and its most powerful weapon that it's using at the moment during this war in Ukraine is information. And the effect of this information is that most of us, most of the West, actually really believe that Russia is winning. Whereas if you look at it from a bird's eye view, Russia has been expected to win in 3 or a few more days, has been kicked out of northern Ukraine, has been kicked out of northeast Ukraine, is now making slow progress in Donbass at a fantastic cost. Nevertheless, we have to think about what the next target might be, and bearing in mind that President Zelensky, as well as future President Trump, are talking about some way in which to stop the killing, and of course we all want to stop the killing. We have to be aware of what might happen if there is some kind of ceasefire. And for us, we recognize that Russia is not going to give up. Russia will continue with its imperialistic policy as long as Putin is in power. And therefore, we have to look at capabilities and intentions. The intention we know, and it was stated quite clearly in December of 2021 in the peace treaties offered to NATO and the United States, and that was a return to 1997 status quo. In other words, for us, we would no longer be members of NATO. Now, that's the intention. What's the capability? Well, at the moment, it is pretty ropey as far as Russia is concerned. And therefore, I want to look first at geography and military mobility, which is directly to do with the chains of supply. Now, the inner German border during the Cold War, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, was about 1,400 kilometers long. The land border between Russia, Belarus, and Kaliningrad is 350 kilometers longer than the inner German border. And the land border with NATO is the famous Swalki gap, 104 kilometers. Now, during the Cold War, on the inner German border, against, admittedly, the Warsaw Pact, which was considerably stronger, NATO had two army groups. Each army group consisted of 4 corps. Each corps had at least 2 divisions, and each division had 2 or 3 brigades. In the Baltic states, we have just achieved the fantastic goal of persuading our allies that we should have 1 brigade in each Baltic state. So during the Cold War, 35 divisional equivalents, and now 3 brigades. And of course, there wasn't a Swalki gap during the Cold War. There was the rest of Western Europe with reinforcements who could come to the aid. Now, in our case, we lack depth and redundancy because unlike Ukraine, which has many different sources of power, we don't have them. We have the sea to the west, and we have our potential enemy to the right. Therefore, if defense and deterrence is going to work, it depends on very, very fast reinforcement with the right training, with the right plans in place. And how do you do this? Well, of course, you can use roads, but let's bear in mind also that the roads, many bridges in the Baltic states were constructed to take Soviet tanks. And Soviet tanks, let's remember, are considerably lighter than NATO heavy weapons. Then there is Rail Baltica, the big hope. There will be.
Let's hope so.
There was a time when nobody believed the Channel Tunnel between United Kingdom and France would ever operate because it went bust 2 or 3 times. I can't remember how many times. And yet, there it is, and it's making a profit. But it took a long time, and we do not have a long time because Russia may be ready to do something much sooner. And we need to think about how to protect the Rail Baltica when eventually it is there. And that means making sure, first of all, that the infrastructure works, that the tunnels and cuttings are fine, big enough to take NATO heavy weapons, and that there is air and missile defense to protect it. Otherwise, it will go. But there is also an alternative, and the alternative comes from the fact that Sweden and Finland are now members of NATO, and therefore incorrectly people talk about the Baltic Sea as being a NATO lake. That is not a sensible way of talking about it, because the Russians still have significant naval bases in the Gulf of Finland and also Kaliningrad, and may be able to affect sea lines of communication in other ways. But it provides an alternative and will be very important also for the High North. Now, my second point is what kind of threat do we face? We're not going to face a conventional threat of an attack on NATO in the Baltic states probably for a number of years. It could be a few years, it could be longer. It depends how the war in Ukraine ends. But what we are quite sure about, and General Pudāns, who is the likely next Chief of Defence in Latvia, has also made this clear. This will be sabotage, arson, particularly affecting our infrastructure. And let's remember, our infrastructure is very vulnerable. Now, in particular, that will affect the Baltic states pipelines. Apparently, the press says 100 to 150 pipelines are cut every year. But it is very interesting that in October 23 and November 24, the Baltic Sea found that we were having our pipelines cut. And these are the ones that carry communications, that carry gas. And if there is no gas coming under the sea, then our LNG capabilities are very few in the Baltic states. There is only one really big storage site. We have few dams and inadequate air and missile defense. Now, if that means that energy is substantially disrupted, it means that everything that we can do within our own region will find it very difficult to continue, and contingency plans need to be made. If we lose communications, then we will find it very difficult to get all the necessities for continuing our industry. And not only that, but communicating with the outside world and communicating to our own populations. And let's be clear that satellites are an alternative, but they're not always a completely reliable alternative. So, for instance, Starlink, owned by Elon Musk, a great favorite of ours, of course, was not permitted to use their communications to attack Crimea, and the bandwidth is considerably smaller than with the fiber optics going under the sea. Intimidation, assassination. We know that the head of Rheinmetall was likely to be the target for an assassination attempt, and the fact that Vadim Krasikov, who in broad daylight in the middle of Berlin shot to death a Russian dissident, was exchanged, is a clear message to the Russian security services: go and do your worst, and we'll get you back. In other words, we do not just need the armed forces, we need to look much more broadly, and that includes situation awareness and the intelligence services. I'll stop here.
So, Mr. Kažvāciņš, thank you. And it seemed that you could actually list those risks for a whole hour and a half, and that's actually quite scary. But to answer those, well, here in Latvia, we only start to build our defense industry, and we are only now looking for solutions. In Nordic countries, it's actually been quite strong for some time already, the military industry. Does that mean that you have already answered all those challenges, or there are still some answers you are looking for?
Yeah. By the way, thanks for having me again. I was in this conference a year ago, and there are panels which are quite predictable when it comes to questions and so on, which comes up, and then there are the ones who are a little more wild. And the experience from last year was that it was quite wild. So at least it pushed me out of my comfort zone with some of the questions. So let's see where we end up today. But in general, security of supply. Let me start first by saying that this is a topic which has become, of course, much more pronounced in the last years than it was in the past. You were referring to some other Nordic countries, and of course there's always been a security of supply strategy somewhere, but it looked different from what it does now, and I think, well, not only the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was triggering this. I would say already the pandemic triggered that to some extent. When countries realized that, the partners that we were having, these bilateral and multinational agreements that were really going to take care of the supply of some equipment, they were really not working. So countries, I would say, unfortunately, had to look at this completely different approach to security of supply. So countries which were not really talking so much about it before, take Sweden for instance, they is now using words which we didn't hear before. So that has changed dramatically. Then, of course, and I would like to stop there as well, security of supply, what is it? I mean, it's defined in so many different ways, and it depends on whom you ask, actually, what they mean by security of supply. In some countries, it means like having all these supplies available in country. And for others, it means like, well, having a supply chain which is securing this. And we were speaking about challenges here. I think one of the challenges that many countries are facing right now, and whether it's you refer to Finland and Sweden, but I think it might be even more here in Latvia or the other Baltic countries, is really what kind of capabilities should be built in that country. Because obviously it would be nice to have everything, but it's quite clear that that would not happen. And I mean, looking at Europe today, it's a bit too fragmented already. And do we want to make it even more fragmented? And just look at how the equipment that is used in Europe. PATRIA, obviously, a manufacturer, as you know, of armored vehicles, but there are 5 or 6 different vehicles manufactured in Europe and used by the EU and NATO countries here. If we look at the US, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that the US is the perfect model for how to do this, but in the US, they have one armored vehicle for every purpose. They don't have 5 or 6 companies competing for this every time. So they have managed to sort of focus on what's important. Still, if you're looking at how those vehicles or fighter aircraft and so on are manufactured, they are involving all 50 states of the US in doing that. So you can still use the base of the countries, and I think that would be possible and even necessary in Europe to do that, to agree in Europe about what are we really going to produce here and how are we going to divide that between the countries. Because I think that it's really, really a big challenge right now for countries, and it will be interesting to hear the State Secretary say some words about that as well. But I mean, looking at what we have done here in Latvia, building the factory for the vehicles and involving local companies. It's referred to as success story was used here before, and of course it is. And so why did that happen? Was it because there was a clear strategy behind, or was it because it was opportunity driven by the fact that Latvia was buying these vehicles? So I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge right now when it comes to security of supply, and really how should every country approach this?
I'm really glad you mentioned this need of coordination in the whole European Union level, and we will go to that. But before that, as I already mentioned, we are just starting to build our industry here, and we are just starting to build our supply chains. Maybe you, as more experienced in this field, can you advise us which mistakes not to make?
Which mistakes not to make? Well, that's a good question.
I'm challenging you now.
Yeah, you are. I think the trap that can be there when you're doing projects like the one we are doing right now in Latvia is that we are too short term. That if we involve a supply chain like we have done locally here in Latvia, we cannot just or the mistake would be if that contract that we would place locally with that company would be only for our deliveries for this contract. We need to have a bigger plan, and there needs to be a prospect for that local supplier, which goes well beyond what we are doing. So they should be able to be a supplier also for our other products and for other customers outside Latvia, and they should also be attractive for other producers to be used as a supplier. So I think that would be the main trap that you could actually end up in.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask Mr. Polaks, do we have a bigger plan, and do you see any other traps we are maybe trying not to fall into? We don't know if we are going to succeed.
That's a question for the State Secretary.
Yeah,
we have planned.
That's intentionally.
But, in general, I just want to reflect on a couple of things what were said by Mats and you actually. It is a bit wrong statement that we just have woken up in 2022 and started to build our industry just now. To be honest, if we look on the timeline, then we have started to talk about the defense industry, calling it maybe in different words, but already in 2013, 2014, that's the, let's say, the point when our defense industry, how we call it now, starts to develop. Now we have the law and everything continues to develop. How we perceive the end state, how we want to see the defense industry, I think that's a very complicated question, and there is no specific definition of that. Most likely we will not be able, and maybe we don't need to build the defense industry as the example or just copying the US defense industry model, because maybe our direction is to build very capable, dual-use focused, very agile and multi-purpose industry for both the needs of the economy and defense purposes. With regards to what we have already learned and what we are learning is, I think I totally agree that the term security of supply, it's a trend name at the moment. Another one is resilience. There is a lot of different definitions and everybody understands it a bit differently. But if we take a look at the things we are thinking at the moment from the perspective of the security supply and the continuity of operations, then we have never thought about these things so much as since 2022. We are thinking, at least in large enterprises in Latvia, one of the very important topics regarding the threats of sabotage and other, let's say, new normal. we're thinking about the force protection as never before. We used to have some incidents in Latvia already on the different facilities. We had the fire gun on the drone manufacturing facility of the company Edge Autonomy. That was not the fact of sabotage, but it sort of asked a lot of questions to the force protection of the facilities. So LMT, as well as the critical infrastructure holder, we have never thought so much about the force protection as we are doing it at the moment. And another direction a lot of companies in Latvia now are going, especially large enterprises, is establishment of the National Guard units within the companies, for example. So that's the one part, the force protection. Another part, which was mentioned before and which is extremely actual for us and very important, is the question of energy and how we continue to operate the network, how we continue to operate data centers or facilities in case of the energy shortage. And that's the topic we are learning a lot from Ukrainians, a lot from Ukrainian telco operators and the telco industry. The another part is the physical doubling of the systems, and we're thinking about the alternative locations for manufacturing in order to continue to. In LMT case, there are two large missions if we talk about the resilience part. The first is the continuity of the normal service, which is communications, and the second is, of course, related to our customer on the defense side to continue to provide the services and products to the end user. And that's why the alternative locations, that's something very, very important. So that's from the practical steps. The another thing, what we have learned, and especially from the example of Ukraine, and I think we are heading there in Latvia's case extremely well, is the importance and actually opportunity of technology versus mass. And that's something I think we are doing very well. We have good enough setup at the moment from the framework perspective in order to our companies to participate in the European Defense Fund projects. There is a part of the bureaucracy channels we have to cross together with our partners at Ministry of Defense, but the most important part is that finally there is a framework and companies are actually very, very active. On the Ministry of Defense side, there are new initiatives in regards to supporting the startups, the smaller companies, and for SMEs, as I said, and large companies as well. The European Defense Fund, that's actually the opportunity, and I think we will discuss it a bit further.
Yeah, we will do that. And here I already heard some answers, which is calming, but I'm not sure Mr. Puriņš is calm. So lack of coordination, possible risks to pipelines and communications, sabotage of infrastructure, Suwałki Gap, of course, bad bridges, lack of Rail Baltica for now, lack of air defense and lack of time, and I just run out of space where to write all those down. I don't know if you want to add some risks, but do you have the answers for those?
Thanks for the list of challenges. Now, just paraphrasing Isaiah Berlin, who's paraphrasing, saying that we all know one big thing: it's security supply is important. How do we make it happen? And you asked, the first question was, what's the difference, security supply, Baltics and Scandinavia? And that's the big one difference is Finland, you were kind of down, how do you say, what there would be in English, but if you look at the Finnish army, they produce everything back at home, basically everything. I mean, every piece of kit and weaponry is somewhere a Finnish engineer behind. So that, and Jānis explained the terrible state of Baltic isolation. So Finland is, they are far isolated. They don't even have a Suwałki Gap. They have.
Is it bad or good?
There is a nuclear gap only up there. So there is clear. And if we look back in history, I certainly believe, and Finland started it right after the getting independence. First. PATRIA ancestors kind of started to put things together and build the weaponries and basically make themselves secure. and we would be there if we hadn't had the occupation and etc. I mean, we got so far as building the fighter planes, before the Second World War, so we were well on the track. Clearly, we are back, and we need to get it going. Obviously, I'm not talking about Sweden and Norway. They have for centuries, having had the companies, defense industries, building and turning and building, Scandinavia being as a one also isolated piece of land. If you look on the European map, is a very big player in the defense industry. There is multiple, and obviously it has gone ups and downs and over the last decades and different trends. But obviously, there is the answer. We need to be going. There is no. I mean, obviously the links and everything is important, but for us, it would be difficult to imagine that we can find a good other answer. The challenge is exactly that we need to kind of step up our game in the defense industry, and that's and the size is not there, and etc. There's many challenges, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing. And on EU, we could be doing, we could have a second round discussion on EU, because obviously EU does not care about Latvian defense industry. EU cares about EU industry, and it's one thing if you go into discussion with a big PATRIA along EU, or big Saab or Countberg, or I'm not even talking about French French multiple defense industry, or German. If you go into this discussion, or if you are Latvia, you don't really have a big industrial partner alongside you. So that's a whole different discussion we are having. How do we make this EU idealistic goals about non-fragmentation, being us all together in the one? How do we make it work also for Latvia, for the Latvian defense industry? How do we make that help support? And I think some of the thoughts were already mentioned. I think we've been so far slowly but successful on all the tools, application of all the EU tools to our benefit, be it EDF, be it this ASAP, and be it ADIRPA, and and obviously that's not accidental. That's a kind of continuous work to make that happen. First designing the rules and then using them. But last point I would make is obviously PATRIA, and I agree with his point that we shouldn't be doing defense industry for the short term. I mean, that's not that shouldn't be the approach. It's a long term, and then obviously once you have it, you have to kind of cherish it. It can't be switched on and off. That's, I think, should be recognized, understood, and I think Finland and Scandinavian colleagues and at different times could be telling a lot about how, when the defense funding goes low, what's how do you make it still live through the these times, and that's probably. But returning to the point you made, obviously we believe strongly that PATRIA is the production in Latvia is something needs to be emulated and so on for a different project. But the one where once we say it's long term, we also need to slowly. It's not it's a beautiful factory and we have a director here and etc. and it's a nice place to visit, but it's still, putting things together. We need to get up to designing things, get ourselves in that level of engineering as well. So that is something, once you say long term, yes, but we need to be kind of, not just hands, the heads as well in this business.
So there's so much I would like to ask. For example, you said we need to get our things up. How are we doing that? But I would like to jump to where you said, talked about idealistic European Union goals, and really Europe has finally understood that you can't win a war with money. You actually need some weapons. And earlier this year, the European Defense Industrial Strategy was introduced, many goals there, and one of them, by 2030, half of member states' procurement budget should go to European defense industry, 60% by 2035. Knowing how fast things usually happen in European Union, Mr. Kažociņš, do you see that happening?
It's a very difficult question to answer. Maybe I can go towards this from a different angle, if you'll allow me. And I want to pick up on what Kasper said about new technologies. And it RAND, some very clever people in RAND Corporation around the year 2000 came up with the 4 stages that warfare has gone through. Melee, which is just a big fight. Mass, which proved that if you have an organized group, that they will defeat a disorganized group, and that reached its highest point during the First World War, particularly on the Western Front. That went into the indirect approach, that is maneuver, which was largely used by all sides during the Second World War and used at the beginning of the Ukrainian war by the Ukrainians much more effectively than Russia. And now we are seeing the move to swarm technology. Now, swarm technology essentially, ultimately, may mean that you have autonomous, ground-based, airborne, and sea-based systems which are controlled according to algorithms by artificial intelligence, receiving their intelligence input directly from satellites and other sensors like radars, and are able to effectively change their attack or defense location thousands of times faster than the best trained brigade, divisional or corps headquarters could ever work it out and give out orders. Now, to do this, we are not very far away, but it involves technological development all the time. And this is Kasper, as I'm sure, can talk about this in more detail in Ukraine, but it is a constant fight on the electronic warfare basis. From my personal experience, I can say that in Northern Ireland, battling against radio-controlled improvised explosive devices, RCIEDs, the defense equipment that soldiers carried around was about 6 months ahead of the provisional IRA's methods of attacking. And therefore, it was very, very close. And now technology is developing even faster. And that means that if we, as the European Union, and in particular the Baltic states, want to have a credible capability of forward defense, without which, in our small countries, which are much smaller than Finland, even all three together, have the capability to continue to produce and allow us to defend ourselves, we need to invest in research and development. At the moment, the investment is pathetic. There is no Baltic state which invests even 2% in R&D. Latvia is probably, well, is in fact the very worst, according to last year's statistics. We should be aiming at 4%. And with that, then we would be looking at modern forms of warfare which don't require so many troops, but with very cheap drones you can kill off expensive tanks.
So I see Mr. Puriņš agreeing with you, but then why are we divorced?
drone coalition. They've started it.
I agree that it's naturally once you start to talk about defense industry for it. I mean, if I can step back, and you mentioned before, I said, how do we get there? I mean, there's only three possible ways. You talk with big suppliers and I'll say, hey, we really like your product, but you have to find a way to cooperate and help us transfer technologies. The second way is invest into R&D to build yourself your solutions. And third is there is nice, beautiful solutions, you just buy them. And the second, the R&D, yes, we need to be, I think it's 2% also from defense budgets, and I will not tell how much is a Latvian defense budget, the R&D, 2%, but we need to do more, and we are writing now the Latvian, what's the defense industry strategy, and I think that's, it's not finished yet, we have conversations, but there is no reason to write that's my personal opinion, no reason to write a strategy, not to, kind of trying to put these ends together, that you need to invest in R&D to have the defense industry, to have the system, being supported to build up the things, and supporting applications of Latvian firms to the EDF, and basically, yes, allocating money towards this ends. And I clearly agree that technologies, Ukraine is, continuously saying there is a technological way. For every problem, there is a technological solution. Always there is a hardware solutions as well, but there is other technological solution.
But usually when we need more money, we tend to look at European Union funds, and there actually is a European defense fund created. Mr. Pollux, how big is their role in strengthening the local industries?
Yeah, I will just comment a couple of things which were mentioned before. So the strategy, that's the important thing. Everything starts with writing the strategy, understanding where we are going, and that's something industry really is expecting to see, because what we really need is understanding the focus, where are we going, because the taking into account that our industry is small, even getting to point about the development of new products and things. Those Latvian companies working in the defense area, we are competing for same engineers to get them hired. We just don't have enough people. It's because when you look on the resumes of the applicants, they have worked in Edge Autonomy, Atlas, LMT, whatever. So these are 5-6 companies they're circulating. So that's why the concentration of efforts is really important, and that's what we want to see through the strategy. What are the priority directions we are going? From the R&D percentage perspective, we sometimes tend to make the situation worse than it maybe practically is. Maybe those are 2% from the Ministry of Defense budget, but what we usually don't count in the total number, and that's the statistics question, is the amount of the money Latvian companies actually invest into the R&D. And if we take like 3 large technology companies like LMT, Microtik, and Softechnica, then actually the investment into our R&D is quite a significant. The question is of concentration of effort. Regarding the European Defense Fund, so I would say that's a low-hanging fruit for our companies to do several things. First is, of course, the co-funding of both European Union and Ministry of Defense in order to develop the products, trying to blend them into the joint project scope. For example, PATRIA and LMT, we are jointly participating into already second project, which is a famous program. The first was European Defense Industry Development Program project, famous one. Now we are within the European Defense Fund project, famous 2. We are talking about famous 3. So that's the thing is joint development of the products and trying to bring different capabilities together. Second is, of course, practical thing, funding our people, funding our, efforts, funding the general development of the capabilities back at home, especially for smaller industries like Latvian one. third is actually network, because there is no other way for Latvian company to get face-to-face introduced and to build network with companies like Kongsberg, Saab, Thales, whatever, Rheinmetall. So that's the fantastic opportunity to build a network. And it pays off when we start to talk about the, whatever word we use, localization, offset is a bad word, involvement of the local industry in the larger procurements here in Latvia, which is actually written in our defense concept that 30% of the large procurement have to involve Latvian industry. That it's much easier for Latvian industry, having had cooperation within the European Defense Fund projects, to find the people you know face to face, because usually those projects are quite large and long for 2-3 years, so you get to know people personally. So that's the huge advantage. And the third is actually being on the peak of technology. Although, to be honest, sometimes there is a situation in European Defense Fund which is extremely bureaucratically regulated.
Really?
Both in both in on the European Commission side and in all member states. We are not the only ones who have made the quite complicated, but at least we have bureaucratic framework for that. Sometimes we are too slow. When we approach the end of the project, technology has run away already, and it's not always easy to make the adaptation of the technology or adaptation of the work package scope within the project, agile enough. And that's why I totally agree with Mr. Kažociņš regarding Ukraine. We are not talking about months in Ukraine how technology develops. We are talking about days, perhaps, hours in some cases. And that's why, unfortunately, but it is the fact that Ukraine at the moment is testing hub of the defense technology for all the companies. And the companies in Latvia or Baltics or wherever in world, the companies who are not bringing their technology to Ukraine at the moment and trying to test it there, they are not doing defense business. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, and one would think that if you can work that fast while being in war, you should do it. You should be able to do that in peace. But I saw that Mr. Warstedt was ready to jump in some time ago already.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a comment to what the State Secretary said before another comment I had as well. But you were mentioning Finland and Sweden, and that those countries are making everything themselves. Well, actually, I can speak for both because I'm representing a Finnish company. I'm actually Swedish myself, so. Anyway, no one knew. Well. My point. It's really not true that the countries are making everything themselves. Take Finland. Finland is buying a lot of artillery. Finland is having the largest artillery force in Europe. Yes, they have in the past manufactured these artillery pieces themselves. They are buying now from South Korea. And there are a number of different examples. And I mean, fighter jets. They are buying from the U.S.
Industrial position, PATRIA. So
exactly, and actually, in that case. PATRIA's role is very similar to what local industry here in Latvia is having in the vehicle. So
involvement, involvement.
Yeah,
I didn't mean that.
And take Sweden.
Yeah.
I mean, take the Gripen fighter. 1/3 of the content is U.S., and if you include the weapons, it's actually 50%. So it also these countries they have to choose what is really done in the country and what is bought from the outside, and also our vehicles. I mean, we buy the engines and the steel from Sweden. We buy a lot of equipment from Germany, from Netherlands, and so on. So there is a large supply chain also in those projects. But I think what the countries have done, what Finland and Sweden has done, is that they have identified those critical capabilities which they need in the country. And you're right, manufacturing the vehicles like we are doing in Valmiera is there is very little, let's say, system integration part in that work. Very little R&D and so on, and that is identified in both in Finland and Sweden as critical. But in Sweden, for instance, certain systems, and that is actually just 2 or 3. I mean, it's fighter aircraft and submarines, and what does that actually mean? It means that the countries, they have committed to maintain those capabilities over time. And I think this is important, and an important aspect, because now when we're having instability in the world, it's easy to mobilize the support, the political support for spending on defense industry. But there will be times, and there are actually, I would say that's almost the rule, that there is low demand on these capabilities. And because there are peaks when the systems are ordered, and when there is, like now, a crisis in the world, the potential customers are lining up outside the door. But there are actually times when the demand is very low, and that requires a commitment from the countries for funding of the defense industry in order to maintain it. And it's easy to forget that that needs to be done as well. And that could be, I mean, financially a bit painful, actually, to do that. And there's a lot of discussions around that in all these countries, really what resources to maintain. Yeah, I just wanted to make that comment, because I think it's applicable also when we are looking at Latvia, for instance, building up new capabilities.
No, that's important, and actually many topics rise from what you said, which are also in the European Union. The strategy, one is coordinating the investments, and actually the strategy talks about collaborative procurements in the future. I'm not sure how we will do that, but the other one I would like to emphasize, that is the risk from relying too much on third countries as well. And that's something the strategy talks about as well. And it doesn't have to even be China. It can be USA. After all, it's on the other side of the ocean, and winds can change there as well. Mr. Puriņš, are we too dependent right now?
From
third countries?
No, we don't want to be independent from Latvia don't want to be independent from United States. We actually want to very close cooperation and partnership, including defense industrial, which is very limited compared to Finland, let's say, with the United States. So that's a broader theme, obviously, in EU level, that there is actually not so much. And there is people complaining that people are buying stuff from South Korea, which is, even outside of NATO framework. And obviously South Korea has these attractive offers, so to say. That's the reason people are procuring there. But that's a different. We don't really. Obviously you mentioned the political and different changes, but Latvia is, it's stated and repeatedly stated, our most important strategic partner is the United States of America. And that means, we want to have their forces in Latvia. We want them to be, we want that our security is a factor in their thinking, which is all fine. But I think we also need to support and, back it up with cooperation at different other levels. Cultural, economical, and defense industrial. So this is something we wouldn't be the first ones to be, arguing against. Where we go in Brussels, that's a whole different discussion, obviously, and there is other countries' interest to argue about independence or too big dependency, and we have a whole discussion to what projects the United States and can participate into in EU and etc. And there is the trade, all the trade discussion, between EU and the USA and somewhat little bit protective nature of EU's defense industries, and the reason, obviously, that you mentioned the targets. The targets is, yes, please do not buy from South Korea or American, buy from the European companies. That's what it says. I mean, that is a discussion we don't want to be understood from Latvia one-sided, that we have to run away from United States.
Anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, just regarding the industrial cooperation with the United States, we just had recently great events organized by Latvian American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C., and Latvian companies went there. We had the discussion together with the State Secretary about the Latvian industry involvement in the United States. So it is easier to say than do, of course, because what I remember is the fantastic story from one Latvian origin gentleman doing business with the U.S. Department of Defense for 25 years. So what he actually did, he was trying to sell for 20 years compressor for U.S. Air Force, just a compressor, just one thing, total focus. He did it after 20 years. Now he is very rich and everything is fantastic, but it took just 20 years. So it's not like walk in a park to enter U.S. market. Although we can be both partners and we can compete on the technology things. So we have good examples of Latvian companies actually entering U.S. market through maybe not a direct approach of the joint venture, that was the merger and acquisition of the Edge Autonomy, of the UAV factory by Edge Autonomy, but still there are some good examples. But again, picking up on the word technology, I think that's the direction where we can cooperate with the US and find some industrial cooperation links as well.
Mr. Kovacic?
A quick comment. We heard that during the interwar years, Latvia was very well advanced in defending ourselves. But even then, spending 29% in 1938 of the total national budget on defense, we were not producing ammunition. Or there was the Riga wire factory was able to produce a small amount of small arms ammunition. Well, there are things we can do, and which the Latvian MOD is doing. Artillery, we know from Ukraine, artillery shells and charge bags are absolutely essential. And here we have Rheinmetall working together with Lithuania to produce the shells. And if I understand correctly, Latvia is on our way to producing the charge bags.
Yes, right. I just, your comment, I had just two things, a little bit sideways, but first thing is we had this all, before the Second World War, sad stories. We ordered the equipment, we paid for it, we never received it because the security supply was closed down and it was never delivered. It stayed and fought the war in Western Front, so to say.
Nor did the United Kingdom from the United States.
So, but no, it's true. We working on that on that, you know, that building these capabilities back at home and you know, setting up the production. So that's all true. Yeah.
Mr. Puriņš, if we switch to public, private, and also regional cooperation, I'm not talking only about military, also in other fields. In the past, we haven't actually, maybe here in Latvia, been champions in public-private cooperation, and the bad experiences have led to mistrust, which has led to maybe over-regulation. What do you see ministries doing right now to change this, to make this cooperation work faster and better?
Cooperation with industry,
Public-private, yeah.
Public-private,
with industry,
yeah,
government work.
I think our cycle of cooperation is way faster than the EU cycle, for one thing. And we're setting up more space. We're reallocating resources within MOD. That basically there is just basically man hours who can work and talk and meet the industry and have a conversation. And if we want to do a larger R&D and the technology, that requires people actually working, and that just doesn't require the money. It requires researchers on the industry side, but also kind of functionaries on our side. So it's just allocating resources. That's and obviously there is always regulations you need to go through, and you mentioned there was mentioned Pentagon has a long lead, but then there is great stories how you can easily access little fundings, and then some of the Latvian companies even are not going to EU because they can, at least one for certain. I know that they say so beautiful how easily they can get the funds for their product, for their R&D, than to go through all that EU process and long term and etc. So clearly, the speed is a matter of factor. So I don't think there is some silver bullets. How do we make? I am I always say when I meet the industry, I'm open. I continuously. I'm reachable by companies, and we try to respond to the concerns and try to find the solutions and just trying to find this cooperation. I don't think there is one quick and easy solution. Obviously, industry wants the strategy, like two things. What needs to be done? Industry wants money. Industry wants consultations of militaries. Industry wants the test fields. So I don't think there is unclarity what exactly in the big things industry needs. But again, each other case is different.
So does industry see that ministry is actually taking obstacles away instead of creating them, as it sometimes happens?
It depends. Yeah. In short, as I said already before, we have and ministry. From LMT side, what we're trying to communicate all the time is when we talk about a ministry, we are not talking about the Pentagon with 35,000 personnel. We are talking like about 100-ish something, maybe a bit more. Working on extremely diverse number of topics, and since 2022, I believe there is a lot of stuff to do, right? There are success stories and there are good stories about the public-private cooperation actually facilitated by Ministry of Defense. At the end of the day, we have, of course, it's not a walk in a park. It is an interesting mutual cooperation, and I think both industry and ministry, we are learning from each other. But at the end of the day, we have 5G testbed in Latvia, which is noticed on the extremely international level from Japan up to United States. That's one thing. At the end of the day, successfully, maybe sometimes not so successfully, but still we are able to manufacture small arms munition, and there is a role of Ministry of Defense as well. We have some good stories like PATRIA. We have good stories with the vehicle Fox. Everybody knows about the Fox, that it was not easy way to go, but defense business in general, it's not easy industry to work in. So there are definitely success stories. What is worrying for industry is the resource and capacity of Ministry of Defense to actually facilitate and to compute all the information and requests we are pushing to them. And we are really pushing, and that's true. State Secretary is, of course, approachable, and you can call him, you can write an email or whatever, but he is one, and there is a lot of us. So what is really worrying for us is the resource. The mechanism-wise and the framework-wise, we have a mechanism for the facilitating R&D activities. Of course, there is a lot of things industry wants. We want to have a system how we can go to the military training ground and explode things and do the testing and do this and that and different things. Something is moving in that direction. Of course, it could be faster because the demand and pace at the moment is extremely fast. Of course, there are always people coming from Ukraine and saying like, hey, It took just 2 calls for me to arrange the training ground, the explosives to test something. But again, that's the war zone, and now we are in a strictly regulated environment. So there are things industry really needs and wants, but from the general setup, it is in place. What we are really waiting for, we were waiting for the industry law. Law is in the place. It is pretty straightforward. The question is when we will see the Ministry Cabinet regulations and how they will be written, when we will see and how we will be involved in the drafting and writing the strategy, because it would be correct that the industry is participating and industry is participating. So these are the things, of course, we are worried, and I think, as I said, so from the framework side, a lot of things has been done. What we are really worried about is the resource, because all those things I mentioned, it's easy to say, let's write a strategy, but somebody has to sit there, hopefully think and write. So it's not just ChatGPT thing, right?
Do we need an answer for this? No, probably not. I hope not. But I want to ask Mr. Warstedt, if we talk about regional cooperation, PATRIA does engage in several partnerships with their various small and medium-sized enterprises. Do you see any conditions which, if created, would stimulate to do it more, and you and other big manufacturers?
Yeah, sure. Now sun starts shining, so then I would say something positive. I will not comment so much about Latvia. Of course, there is bureaucracy in Latvia as well, but I consider it one of the easier countries actually to work in. And as my colleague Ujis is always telling me, no one in Latvia is more than 2 phone calls away. And I actually haven't tried it, but you agree? Yeah. No, but let's talk about regional cooperation, and actually the framework of EU, which is usually referred to as being extremely bureaucratic and very slow and so on. There are actually frameworks which enables cooperation. And we had one very good example here that Kaspars was mentioning before, the European Defence Fund, the famous project, which has been very successful so far, where PATRIA actually is the lead company in that consortium, but it's consisting of, well, I don't know how many countries are there in Famous 2. It's 8 or 9 countries, and in every country there are a number of companies, big and small, that are participating. So that's a very good form of cooperation, and there EU is actually an enabler. And there we can also see that the result of that project could actually be something that I was describing before, more of a unified vehicle that for Europe. But yeah, and that is it's an ongoing R&D project, so we will see the results in some years. But we have, of course, this very current example of cooperation, and the EU regulatory framework actually allows countries to cooperate, government to government, around the R&D contracts as well. So the contract or the cooperation that has enabled what we see here in Latvia today, the production of the 6x6 vehicles, that's the CAVS program, that's the Common Armored Vehicle System program, which started as an initiative from Latvia and Finland, and where later Sweden came on board, Germany is on board, and then there are a number of countries knocking on the door to join that program as well. I think that's, and again, you could say that so far it's a success story, and in quite a short time frame, we have achieved a lot in that cooperation. And that there are, of course, a number of reasons for why it has worked, and I would say the main enabler for that program to be so successful, and also for the countries, the customers, to receive the vehicle so quickly, is that the countries, they have put aside a little of what was really important in the past, and that was specific national requirements. And that was cost driver, an enormous cost driver, and also resulted in very long times from contract to delivery and so on. So where vehicles which we delivered to different countries maybe were something like 60-70% similar between the countries in the past, and with the rest being national adaptations and a lot of R&D work and so on, today that is more like 95, maybe even 98%, which is common between the customers. And that is a true enabler for cooperation.
But I don't know if you see that as an issue, but it seems that in political level, when you talk about regional cooperations, the national interests are always somewhere in the air. We all want the factory to be here, maybe not the people who live close by, but the other people want that to happen. The jobs are here, that's one, but the other thing, if the war actually starts and you need the weapon and artillery, it's already here, which is really good if we talk about supply chain security, right?
Yeah, and of course, well, we are talking about two different things here. One is the national requirements on what these vehicles should actually do. The other one is where they are produced, and there are of course national needs and national desires on having part of the production. And in the case of, well, take the CUFS program, which I referred to. I mean, the member states in that cooperation are meeting on a regular basis, and they are actually agreeing about how and what and when these different vehicles are going to be delivered. And they are discussing maybe giving up a time slot in their own program in order for new members to get vehicles quickly. So it's a good tool, I would say. It takes work and administration to run these programs, but I think the payback, the payoff is really positive.
You want to add? Or
yeah, I just wanted maybe challenge a bit the understanding of the security of supply. What sometimes we tend to maybe mix here in Latvia. We try to take the example of the CAVS project and apply it to absolutely everything. Like everything we buy, we need another facility in Valmiera, another director, and replicate it. It's not necessary. It should be the same approach and example, because I don't think it will ever happen that in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, in all those three countries, we will have separate full cycle, I don't know, artillery munition manufacturing or something. There should be regional cooperation, and regional cooperation, unfortunately, or fortunately, exactly means that there is no factory in every country, but there is some sort of cooperation. And regional, I mean, we have to think much broader than Baltics, but including the part of Scandinavia and Poland at least as well. And from the actual need of having everything manufactured in the country, there is the famous Maslow pyramid, and we can apply it to the military requirements as well. So the basic needs, as I don't know, the clothing, food, small arms, munition, etc. So these are the things which are needed, and they are actually in Latvia already now. At least part of that, significant part of that, is localized already here. The higher we go into the pyramid, to the long-range fires, to the high technology things, there will be much larger cooperation scope.
So I see that the sun is really hard on you, but we actually should celebrate it since it's been such a rare condition lately. But let's move towards the end, not because of the sun, but because of the time. Discussing things, and I like discussing things, that's what I do for a living, but well, it's important if it helps us to understand what to do. So maybe we can go a quick round. Mr. Kažots, let's start with you. What are the practical steps to be taken as soon as possible to answer at least some of the problems we discussed here today?
I think that a lot of things are already in train, but we need to talk to our European partners more, because there is a palpable feeling that in Western Europe there does not appear to be a threat.
Still.
And from the time when soon after independence the Baltic states were thought to be Russophobes, because we saw that the bacillus of imperialism had not left the Russian soul, certainly not the one that was in the Kremlin, and in the ex-KGB. And Western Europe wanted to make friends with Russia, and therefore it was quite difficult for Western Europe to support us. But thankfully, they understood sufficiently to allow us to join NATO. Then the big shock of Ukraine, and then finding out that what was considered the second most powerful armed forces in the world were only the second most powerful in Ukraine. That has left an impression, and the threat level has sort of receded.
So how do we change that?
We need to be talking to them because, for instance, I mentioned right at the beginning the need for air and missile defense. There isn't enough being produced in Europe, and the United States needs its own as well, particularly if it ends up having to be putting much more focus on the Asia-Pacific region. And that means that Europe has got to get its act together. That, of course, means governments being prepared, as we heard from Mats, being prepared to put in the money to support industry when there may not be necessarily that demand, but it's there at the moment.
Okay.
So that, and I would say R&D, there's a whole list of things, but the very final thing, if this is the last word, I would say from a Baltic perspective, though we may not have the likelihood of a full-scale military attack in the coming years, we need to prepare for it. In other words, our plan should be to hope for the best but prepare for the worst, or as the Romans used to say, civis pacem para bellum.
Okay, let's switch to industry. So we heard talking to EU, investing money in air defense, being ready, practical steps. How do we achieve that, Mr. Warstedt?
Yeah, let me put it this way, two things. I mean, in looking ahead, what will enable more investments, for instance, from industry if we take Latvia, and that is a clear strategy on what you want to achieve. We're not necessarily asking for money. We're ready to invest, but we need to know really what you want. So that is one really important thing, I would say. The other one is cooperate. I think, I mean, I'm responsible within PATRIA for the Nordic and the Baltic countries. I travel a lot in these countries, so I'm not as much in Lithuania and Estonia as I am here in Latvia. This is really my second home. But I hear the same things from all the Baltic states, for instance. You could do a lot. You referred to that the combined GDP is not as much as Finland's, but it's even if it's just half of that. And looking what Finland has achieved in terms of, well, we were talking about the artillery before, but also the fact Finland is now buying 66 fighter aircraft and so on, and looking at the military capabilities, there is so much that the Baltic countries could do and achieve if there was more cooperation. And I sort of jump. I tend to end up in panels. That's the destiny of my life right now. And I sit in all these three countries and I discussing basically the same things. And it would be great.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure. It would be great if
I've also traveled across the Scandinavia, and it's always nice to hear about Nordic cooperation and the difficulty there as well. So, so
we have our challenges.
It goes both ways. On the strategy, sure, that's clear. The problem is we have the state defense concept, which actually says very explicitly what we want. We want armament, we want equipment and maintenance of tracks, which is very narrow view. I mean, we would exclude all the technologies, all the R&D, what we are into now currently trying to replicate and so it's we shouldn't be also putting ourselves in a narrow slots and discarding the rest the field. Because stating that we only interested in it would simplify. I don't, I can allocate one person to doing this one thing, but then probably we don't have to do much with LMT here. I mean, because they are very heavily into technologies, and our state defense concept actually doesn't state that we need to do something with them. So we shouldn't be closing in ourselves, especially that there is huge area of technology opening up, and we be looking actually open-minded where we can explode. But what we need making friends. We need to be keeping friends, making friends with Finns, with Scandinavia, with NATO, with EU, Latvia. We need to keep making friends and making friendships stronger. We need to keep convincing people that conscription should be like in Finland. We need to have the people into army. We need to make conscription worthwhile. We need to make it useful, but that it builds the manpower we need for security deterrence. And we need a strong industrial defense base, defense industry base as well that can support our defense. And I don't think that's something unique in that sense, what we need to do.
So, Mr. Pollux, besides making friends and the other stuff, what ministry should do? But really shortly.
Oh, I agree with the everything which was said before. The maybe internal thing, but still it has its replication on the security of supply. The defense procurement system. That is something, one of the fields we did not discuss today, but it has gone through hard times during last years here in Latvia, and we all together have to make it, I'd say, more agile. And again, it's I think in 90% it's just the question of the resources. From the practical things, industry and I think ministry will only increase our cooperation if we all together will understand how we want to see the industry in 10, 15, 20 years. So that's the question of the vision, and not using the word strategy. We used it a lot today. From the practical steps, European Defence Fund, that's something we have to continue to participate. We have to continue to cooperate with Ministry of Defence. We have to make the best use out of it as much as possible and learn from other countries how they are doing that. And think wider on the security of supply, think on the industrial base development, think on the regional perspective. Building defense industry doesn't mean we have to build, I don't know, F-35 manufacturing here in Latvia for 100%.
Okay, thank you. And we really don't have much time. I wanted to ask who in the audience thinks he has the best question, but I see several hands. I think Gats was the first.
Gats Seglits, I'm ex-minister, also have worked on security issue. My question, comments and the question. So first of all, about the PATRIA, I remember when I was a minister, it was great effort and insistence from that time for Defense Minister Artis Pabriks, who was really pushing that there is a foothold from this big contract, and it's I'm happy that it's materializing in Valmiera, and I hope it will grow into 100 million billion euro business maybe one day. That's one thing. Fox was mentioned. I don't think it's a good example because I know the guys who invented it, but I think the ministry hasn't bought even a single unit. But my comment question is about sense of urgency.
We hear here that they have, but the question is...
Sense of urgency. I don't see sense of urgency. Salius military polygon. Yeah, it's 3 years now. 3 years there's war, and only recently I read in the news that they are starting to clear the forests. 3 years. So also Liepāja naval base, NATO base, almost 3 years. Where is the investment happening there? It's not happening. So and that's just two examples where I don't see sense of urgency.
Firstly, Minister of Defense has invested almost 1 million in production, in designing it. Firstly, and secondly, there is a cabinet minister decision, basically greenlighting the procurement of them, 32 pieces. So project is going into production phase. That's one thing. On the Celia, I mean, it's as fast as design work goes. I mean, there is no a day where people are not working. There is offices. Currently there is multiple. 4 projects implemented simultaneously. 2 are in the building phase. 1 is in a designing phase. There is no, how to say, a day, nothing happening. I mean, there is all the decisions has been made. Whoever has built a house, he knows it takes time. It takes time to design it, and then it takes time to build it. And it's built as fast as it can. The trees are cut within that building time frame. There hasn't been delays in any sense built in, or some delays for the money or delays for lack of decision. So and then as been said, we're still on track for end of next year to finish the first phase. So nothing has been promised earlier than that, and there is no desire to be delayed that date. That's first thing. On the Liepāja airport, that's a long-term work what MOD has been involved into to attract NATO agreement that could be a NATO port, and that could attract NATO funding. And currently there is a NATO agency been tasked, NATO NSP agency, on implementing of that project, and that agency, as we speak, are implementing. NATO agencies implementing the port building. It will not be built in a year. That is a multiple year project. It will. That's not a simple and a cheap one. I think there's a multiple 100 million project in the totality. So we should be accepting that implementing projects takes time. That doesn't happen one day.
You wanted to add?
Yes, just regarding the famous or unfamous Fox story, that was exactly my example, that finally it has reached the stage that there is a procurement. The fact that there was not a sense of urgency, the question, could there be in such a project sense of urgency? That's of course a discussion. And I know perfectly the guys as well. They have lived through a lot of years uncertainty, and that actually shows that they're committed, because they were almost desperate and they were ready to sell the IP, but it never happened. So in ministry, that's the fact, they have supported them, and finally we have the procurement. So it is sort of a success story. We are talking actually about the procurement system there, and there we are in a one I would say in a one box with Ministry of Defense as well, but they are same as overregulated as we are.
Okay, I think Mr. Kaja was the second fastest.
My name is Juris Kaja. I'm a journalist doing some background research here for the global Spanish news agency EFI. And I have two questions. One on supply chain security very directly. the Chinese have announced that they are no longer exporting a lot of components that go into drones. Was that a surprise? I mean, the Swedes would say sort of "Good morning, Actionable, God morgon, Ixskaft." How did that happen? That's one question. The other question is, well, Sweden has the Gripen, the Americans build tanks and jets. But as we are entering the age of digital warfare, which Janis described, does not Latvia and the Baltic in general have a great capacity in IT innovation that we could be the first country or the first region to build, say, a totally artificial intelligence-driven military command post that would work with sensors, and it would work, 1,000 times faster than any field commander could assess a situation. Of course, that would be the whole issue of autonomous killing and all that, but that would get around to that once we've designed it. So
It's nice to hear optimism, but let's start with the first question about Chinese.
First, you take the second.
Okay.
Did China's approach to make microchips and so on come as a surprise? No, not really. I mean, the main concern right now is that most of these chips are made in Taiwan, and the threat that China is currently imposing on Taiwan, that's the real threat here when we're talking about these components. There's been a shortage now for quite some time, and it's influencing us to some extent, but the real worry is about Taiwan.
So, I guess you get the second question.
I will quickly, regarding the drone components in China, it's already, I don't know, third or fourth already announcement during the war that they are stopping it, but they still continue because that's a business for them. They have been selling, they sell, and they will sell the components and drones to both Russians and Ukrainians and to us as well, until the extent it crosses some borders. So it is something everybody has calculated in their resilience and continuity of the business already now, if they are doing this thing smart. Regarding the second question and the technologies, I think the Europe in general has been lagging back so long that in upcoming years, the first thing to do, what we have to do, is to fulfill the basic needs and basic requirements, which are to have the enough resources for the maneuver, for the artillery, for ammunition, etc., etc. And then we can, of course, we have to in parallel think about the technology. But at the end of the day, until in upcoming 5-10 years, still there have to be boots on the ground to be there and to have a human in the middle to make decisions. On the AI part, I think that is something which is evolving at the moment. There are two huge companies competing for this in the market in general. One is US-based Palantir, another is Helsing, which is a European company, and they are dominating in the region. There are some attempts in the Baltics to go the, let's say, completely new technological direction. For example, the new Estonian company, which has its presence in Latvia as well, and actually engineer team is coming from Latvia, Frankenberg Technologies. They have taken a huge challenge to develop scalable anti-aircraft missiles. We will see how they will compete with that challenge, but they are very positive. There is a lot of famous people around that project at the moment, and a lot of engineers. So I think those things have to go into parallel. We cannot rely only on technology and not arming ourselves with weapons, boots, armor, etc.
I have also two small questions. So following up on what yours has asked, do you have and speaking about security of supplies, do you have any policies regarding procurements from China and Chinese companies, and do you source any components and materials? And the question to you is casual things. Valeri's Illusion has recently depicted a very grim reality what we are living in, claiming that the Third World War has already begun. And also following how the Russia's narrative about the war has changed, they're fighting the collective West and NATO. What's your take on that? Thank you.
We don't have any Chinese suppliers now. I mean, we...
Good for you.
Well,
Good for us.
no, I think you can dissect our vehicles and don't find made in China anywhere in them. Well, it is so in that sense, we and that has been, of course, a deliberate strategy from our side, not to have Chinese components. Actually, if you might even stretch it to say that we have no U.S. components either, because obviously the everything coming from the U.S. is under very strict control, export control, the ITAR control as they call it. So that is causing an enormous amount of administration to have the U.S. components in the vehicles as well. So we are very carefully scrutinizing our supply chains when in all our products.
So same strategy or only saying so?
Same strategy, of course, and from the practical way, even in the LMT core business, we have tried to kick out the Huawei equipment, for example, from the core of the network and stuff. Same strategy.
Okay, thank you. And so the Third World War question.
Yes, that's precisely what Putin has been putting about, that Russia is at war with the West and we need a new security architecture, not just in Europe, everywhere. That is, as I said right at the beginning, Russia's most powerful weapon is the information weapon. And they use it extremely well, using the most modern methodology. Therefore, we shouldn't take everything the way that they want us to take it, but rather take a step back and look at it rationally and see what the reality is.
Thank you. And the last question goes to the guy at the end of the audience.
Bernie Sanders has stated that I will be a bit proactive, that many defense contractors see the war in Ukraine primarily as a way to make profit, and saying that as the next coming years there will be more state funds allocated to defense industry, shouldn't we have like mechanisms to counter bad faith actions, for example, windfall tax on extra profits? Thank you.
So that probably goes to ministry, I think.
No, we don't have defense industries that's earning extremely well. I'm not sure what's the profit. What's the profit margin you have, PATRIA? Maybe we need to tax you more. Yeah,
That's what we do now in this country. We tax more.
We take that out.
that was the question.
No, but a straightforward answer to your provocative question. I would say this is finally a chance for us to really contribute from the defense industry to defending the democracy. And of course, we have a lot to do. But as we discussed here before, there are periods when we don't have so much to do, when we're suffering and definitely not having large profits. I think it's part of the game that we are having it now. I think it's important. I mean, the defense industry has a moral responsibility during these times not to increase the margins too much. So I mean, we are part of this as well. But basically, I think the defense industry in general, and I think I can speak for all companies, we are proud of what we are doing, and we are proud that we can contribute to defending our way of living.
No big profits in the future as well? Okay, I think...
Sorry, this was for me. Yeah, I just was thinking what Matt said. I had an interview trying to hire an engineer just a couple of days ago, and he came with the statement that, I don't see the long-term perspective in working in defense industry because, war will finish and in 2 years there will be no fund allocation and everybody will be doing something else. Maybe a bit, a short-term vision, but there is some truth in that because it goes up and down and to be honest, I really hope that after, 5 years, and within those years, nothing really bad will happen. And me and Mats, we could do maybe not really something else, but work a bit less than we are working now. Yes, but we can do something else. So, of course, at the moment, that's the time of opportunity to build the capabilities, to hire personnel, to do new things, to go much faster than we have done it. Before, but again, mainly it is of course business, but it is protecting the democracy and our way of living.
So now it's your last word.
The Marshall Plan, which will come into effect sometime in the future, we don't know when, to restore Ukraine, will create huge profits in the same way as the original Marshall Plan worked best for the United States, but also, of course, for Europe. And then there will be a Marshall Plan, quite possibly for Russia, when Russia changes, because it's now in such a deep hole, it will require a lot of help to get out of it.
I think that's a nice place where to end this. Thank you all so much for being here, for speaking. I would just like to end this by saying that I think we really all have a huge privilege of time to sit here and discuss this and get ready and prepare. It would really be a crime not to make most of it. So let's do it. Thank you.